impact this will have on England's World Cup remains to be seen.
It has to be at least 3 to 4 weeks, or possibly even 6 weeks, considering his track record.
Well, it's been described as a joke and scandalous, but the controversial decision to clear Owen Farrell of a dangerous tackle means he's free to face Argentina.
Yeah, it's great for us in terms of having our captain and leader back in, and well, not back in, but getting away with.
How disappointing it is that George Moala got 10 weeks. I think, you know, my heart just breaks for someone like him. The way they've both been judged is pretty shocking, to be honest. Like, it's a bit of a step in the face.
Today, World Rugby confirmed it will appeal the decision to downgrade Owen Farrell's red card for a high tackle.
And this feels very similar, doesn't it? Yellow to red. Billy Vunipola gone. Now we wonder when Billy Vunipola will be next available to play for England.
Tēnā koutou katoa, good evening. Welcome into the breakdown. Well, the Owen Farrell fiasco has continued all week, and now England have another player in the naughty corner. Billy Vunipola will front the judiciary in his Rugby World Cup. Well, we're not sure how many games he will play. Shannon Frizzell is the latest to join the All Black injury ward, and we've got the Ranfurly Shield live in studio, the new and improved Ranfurly Shield. Today, we've thrown out the old heads and we've brought in the big dogs. Taylor Johnson, Mils Marina, you're back, and John R4. Welcome to the program. How are you today?
No, good, thank you. Yeah. No, enjoyed to be here, and unsure who's the old dog, really.
Why are you looking at me?
He is the oldest,
You've been to look somewhere else. I know you've been away for a long time, but you've been to take those guys somewhere else when you say that.
You already pulled out a year now as well. We're only 20 seconds in, so you're off to a great start.
First time, Mills, that you literally are the oldest here on the breakdown, but 3 weeks to go until the Rugby World Cup. Where are the excitement levels right now?
Man, it is picking up, hey, Kirsty, because, you know, the All Blacks have left. You know, there's still a few games going on, you know, overseas, and the warm-up games, the autumn sort of internationals. But man, she's starting to pick up, and I think the whole country's starting to get in behind it now. The excitement about, you know, the All Blacks and how they sort of played. There's a few controversial things, Taylor, that's happening at the moment, which is always sort of spicing things up.
Oh, is there what? Talk about those red cards. I mean, like, we're going to get into it, but it's totally unfair. But hey, I'm looking forward to the World Cup, particularly seeing those Pacific teams coming through with, you know, some of the All Blacks and Wallabies making the switch. So I think everyone's getting excited for the World Cup.
Well, let's talk about those big decisions. There have been 3 red cards, 3 big red cards in the last couple of weekends. Owen Farrell went to the judiciary, led off and free to play the Rugby World Cup. World Rugby, though, have appealed that decision. George Moala, he was banned for 10 weeks. That has been brought down to 5 weeks. So his Rugby World Cup is all but over for Tonga. Is this judiciary system, is it fair, John? You've been to it before. What's it like from a player's perspective?
Oh, it's difficult as a player, you know. We're there, we're trying to play the game as fair as we can, and things happen. And obviously you get cited, you go to the hearing, and once you're in that hearing, you have no control. The lawyers take over, which seems like a very formal process, but that's how it is in the northern hemisphere. And and you're just sitting there and you're unsure what they're talking about, because they're using these words that you're not used to in the rugby circles, where they're bringing in all these facts and they're breaking words down and what the words mean and how does that sit around it. And I think with Owen Farrell, with Jamie George, and using him as changing the angle, and that's how they got off it.
You just mentioned Owen Farrell. We're going to look at the different incidences. I mean, here is the first one. Mills, how do you have one guy with that shot that is free to play the week after, and George Moala's Rugby World Cup is over? What's the differences?
Well, let's just get one thing clear. This isn't a fault of Owen Farrell. The judicial system is absolutely broken. Do you know what I mean? So, I mean, you've spoken about, you know, you're going into lawyers. What a fantastic lawyer. You know, he's obviously got him off. But what we're getting to in the nitty-gritty of the things is you've got a case where it's clearly they've gone on about, you know, head contact, you know, making sure there's mitigants. There's been a yellow, then the referees have said is a red. So when that happens, surely you'd be thinking there's going to be some weeks missed. When they come out and the lawyers actually got him off, outstanding. So, you know, good on Owen Farrell for doing that. But then you have another incident where they've just gone, you know, heavy on Moala. 10 weeks straight away, 10 weeks. I mean, I've seen a lot worse than sort of that. And then you've got Owen Farrell that now that World Rugby have come in and have appealed it. Well, where's the appeal for this? You know, does he get an opportunity to sort of appeal that? I think they should. And why aren't Tonga appealing it? Have they not got the resource like England had in terms of financially? That's the questions now sort of lingering around.
There's so much wrong with this whole thing. Like, first, just coming out and saying the referees were wrong. Like, you're supposed to back your referees. We're heading into a World Cup, and they're always the ones who are under the biggest scrutiny at the World Cup. And then you're just putting question marks on what head contact is, because as you said, you've seen so many other instances that's a straight red and, you know, bans. George Moala as well. And you mentioned World Rugby's appealing it, but that's only because of the backlash. You see the amount of people that, you know, have said something. Stephen Luatua, Peter Aki, Richie Moanga, TJ Perenara. And I think this is really the first time where a judiciary announcement has come out and players have actually said, I don't agree with it. You know, you always see the media and the fans having a go, but for the players to actually say, this isn't right, I think that's where World Rugby has said, we need to step in, because what else are they going to challenge if you know?
The hard part now, and this is now, because of the backlash in it, Vunipola's just... He
is he going to cop it?
Well, that's what I mean. That's what I reckon is going to happen. You know, and he's going to go in there, and it's obvious he's going to be, you know, obviously being judged on on the backlash of what happened to Owen Farrell. I mean, so is he really going to get a fair hearing? He's probably going to have the same QC. He probably might get him off, and so. He's in a poor position coming into it when he goes to the panel. And who is the panel? Because my understanding is there's just various sort of panels in terms of there's no real one judicial system. You know, it's based on, you know, if it's a Northern Hemisphere, then it's Southern Hemisphere that do it, and vice versa. When you're in another competition, SANZA jump in. So where's the system? What system are we actually using in terms of the judicial? And that's perhaps why we're getting so many inconsistencies.
What do you think of the incident we've just seen with Billy, and what impact would it have for England if he is to miss some games of the Rugby World Cup, and if World Rugby does overturn the decision and Owen Farrell's gone for a few weeks as well?
Yes.
Two massive players.
Two big players. You know, Billy's great for them, ball carry, he attracts a lot of defenders. And if he's gone, you know, the replacements, they're a little bit different. They're kick chase, they're over the ball, they're in the channel, so... And then if Owen's gone, then it goes to Ford, who he's to play a similar game. Matthew a bit more attacking shape, but I think when you mentioned about players speaking out, it's the frustration, because they could be me, they could be someone else. There's club level, there's international levels, there's Heineken Cup levels, and you just see it, it's so different, and you just don't know where you stand.
And I think the frustration comes with the consistency. It's just not consistent. And as you're saying, Mills, you know, there's not just one body that is, you know, being sent to the judiciary. Like, it's madness that World Rugby is challenging a different body about this decision, when World Rugby should be, you know, the final decision makers. They make the rules, so why are they challenging the Six Nations Judicial Committee? And then another thing, it's the cost. You know, you said before, you know, you went onto the judicial. How much was that, you know, with your lawyers?
Yeah, you know, I was lucky enough, the club funded it, but it was up to 10,000 New Zealand dollars for, you know,
that would have cost for about an hour with a lawyer.
2 days work,
trouble,
you know what I mean? So, you know, that's what it is, the funds and who's available, and, you know, it's high performance. So.
And it's no surprise, Tonga, Samoa, Fiji, they don't have $10,000 to spend on appealing a decision. You know, that money would go towards flights, you know, towards even food, ACOM, you know. It's like chalk and cheese, and that's where that talking point of Tier 1 versus Tier 2, it's never, ever going to be fair when it comes to this type of judicial system. I think it's madness that we need lawyers, you know. As a lawyer myself, I'm like, this is ridiculous. We're not arguing real law here. It's just rugby. Yes, rugby's important, but it's not murder, you know. Why do we need lawyers? We should have a different form of process here.
Well, there's no doubt this has been an absolute circus all week, and the head coach of England has weighed in on it, Steve Borthwick.
The preparation for such a great test match has been overshadowed, not by the tackle, but the process that's then followed. We thought it had been concluded on Tuesday, and unfortunately now it hasn't been. And it's also been the messaging and the furore around it that's moved off rugby and moved on to questions around Owen's character. That's the thing I think that's really overshadowed the build-up to it, which is disappointing, because we want to be here talking about rugby.
When you're talking about somebody's son and you're asking them the question, he's always going to be flawed there. So what I probably would say at this moment in time, that the circus that's gone in and around all of this is absolutely disgusting.
Yeah, Andy Farrell, their father of Owen Farrell, of course, who's the head coach for Ireland. Ireland beat England this morning. Of course, there was that red card. But England's starting to implode a couple of weeks out from the Rugby World Cup. You're seeing these judiciary issues happen. They lost their coach at the end of last year. Should they have just stuck with Eddie Jones? What do you reckon, John? You were over there at the time, weren't you?
Yeah, I think Matthew's still trying to find their identity. Obviously, Borthwick's come in and he worked under Eddie, but he had a great year with Leicester and took them to the final and they won it. So he's Matthew trying to change the players there and play that kind of game plan, which is a lot of kicking, territory, pressure game. And they might have the set piece for it, but they're struggling elsewhere. And good teams like France, they can match them. Ireland can match them, and you saw, took them to the 22, was able to build phase and put them in the pressure, scored. So unsure if that's going to be enough for a World Cup for them.
A lot of change happening in a short space of time, and they're not getting the results, Taylor.
No, well, since sacking their coaches, England, Wales and Australia have won a combined total of 5 tests. And, those came with Wales and England tests against each other, so someone was bound to win. And I think, going back to when people were saying, Razor should take over Fozzie, I think staying with Fozzie was the right decision because look at what happened with all these other teams. So I think there's a lot of turmoil happening and I don't think these teams are going to click with a few weeks to go.
Well, let's hear from Ian Foster then. The All Blacks left for Twickenham earlier this week and he was asked about the judiciary and whether or not he thinks a card in the judicial system is going to cost a team a Rugby World Cup.
So what we're seeing now is nothing different to what we expected, and we just got to, let's face it, it's as the pressure ramps, it's not just on the teams, it's on the referees, the judiciary, everything. So everyone's working hard together to try to make sure we get the right result.
I mean, that is the single most important thing for teams, right, Mills? Keep the fate in your own hands. Easier said than done.
And that's what worries me. We're going to a hotly contested Rugby World Cup, and I can guarantee you this will not be the end of talking about the judicial, because there's going to be moments in there, there's going to be players that perhaps stay down when they're not that sort of injured. We don't really want to be talking about the judicial system, and the thing is you can control certain aspects, but you'll come up with certain scenarios. I mean, you just have to think of Angus Starvale won last year, and they've moved on from that. They've understood that the speed of the game. But what worries me is that we're just going to be talking about red cards, judicial not getting on board, and it has the potential to ruin what's going to be an outstanding Rugby World Cup.
Yeah, the difficult thing too as well, and it's been spoken about at every single World Cup, is the difference of refereeing in the Northern Hemisphere and the Southern Hemisphere, so it's only going to be amplified by this. But I agree with Ian Foster. It is kind of in our hands, regardless of what team you're in, but at the same time you go back to, but it's also in your hands with what lawyers you can afford in this judiciary system. So we could see 2 exactly the same instances, but it depends on who's got the better lawyer, and I'd hate for a World Cup game to be decided on that.
Do you think it has a bearing on guys' decision-making out there? Is it going to make them hesitate? This is a game that you want to actually hit bodies and get confrontational. Is it now up to guys to go, actually, man, I want to be a passive tackler now just in case? I think it is. I think the game's changing with obviously the tackle height. People are worried about head highs because straight away, red cards, you're down. And, it's a Rugby World Cup. We want to see them play. We want to see them give everything. But I think you don't want the players to go out and be worried about stuff like that, play freely. And if something happens, then they can trust the system because they're going to be fair. But at the moment, I don't think that's there. And so now they're going to be worried, should I make that tackle? Should I jump for that high ball? And what am I going to stay on the ground? Yeah. So it's going to be difficult for players out there and just trying to play their best game.
It's a really good point to make. I mean, there's 2 things that could keep players from the field at a World Cup. That is a red or a yellow card, and also injuries. And we've seen key injuries to the All Blacks. Brodie Retallick was ruled out for 6 weeks a couple of weeks ago with that niggly knee. Shannon Frizzell has joined the injury ward. He's gone for what sounds like 6 weeks with a hamstring injury. We talked about England, if they potentially lose their captain in Vunipola, but what about these 2 for the All Blacks in those opening couple of matches? Yeah,
those 2 good players have been great, and we think straight away they got South Africa coming up and then into France. 2 big forward packs, but not just size but height. And you're taking out 2 guys like that who are main jumping options. It puts pressure on the line-out, and other players who come in, are they jumping or are they guys who they use around the field? So the All Blacks might have to change up their line-out systems, maybe drop the 5-mans or play with a bit more tempo.
What are the All Blacks thinking in regards to these injuries? Brodie Retallick's probably back a little bit earlier, so you could afford to keep him, but Shannon Frizzell and the hamstring Mills, when they've only got 5 loose forwards, you drop that down to 4 available and only 3 fit locks at the moment as well.
Yeah, and the big thing is Frizzell was really getting into some big moments, big games, his physicality, particularly in the Springbok game. He was man of the match by far, and he backed it up against the Wallabies over in Melbourne. We were just starting to find that Jerome Kaino, sort of mould.
You want him on the field.
You want him on the field, and the hard part is, whilst they go into the fact that Retallick's out, okay, it now brings instability. And do you move Barrett, back into the 6? He's been awesome at lock, but also, the fact that because you've lost, Frizzell, who steps up, and the injury that he's got. Retallick, it's instability, right? So they're trying to do as much as they can to heal. But when it comes to a hamstring injury, that can take a bit longer than 6 weeks. And there's a cut-off point where you go, okay, well, we'll take Shannon, but at what stage, when you get into sort of week 3 and week 4, you go, man, he's not going to be right. And we're carrying someone when essentially we could bring in a Sami Peni-Finau to actually cover that. And that's where it becomes tricky with hamstrings, because whilst they seem okay, anything can happen to actually put you backwards another 6 weeks. And that's the scary part about having a hamstring. But, I mean, the All Black coaches, they'll be talking about this a lot. They've got a bit of cover there. There'll be some big decisions made in terms of the way we play, but I think the physicality, that's where we're going to lose a little bit of edge. You talk about the lineouts, but the physical battle, which is somewhere that the All Blacks have predominantly over the years have really, tried to step up in that department. We've just started to get that back, only to lose Frizzell.
Yeah, I mean, injuries are going to be really big. You only look back at the other World Cups with Beaver, how far back we had to go.
Don't give him any more time in the sun, all right?
But, there's the next cab of the rank in every position, but even the profiles within the positions are really different. You look at halfbacks. If one of those halfbacks go down, if Aaron Smith goes down, I'm taking Brad Weber because they play a little bit more similar game. But, if the other two and Roygaard goes down, I'm going to take Fakatava because they play such different games. And the unfortunate thing is they both play for Hawke's Bay. So one of them is getting less minutes than the other. So
what about Tawera Kerr-Barlow?
Yeah, he's over there.
Is he an option at all? Like, if we're looking at injuries, potential replacements, because injuries do happen, we know that in a contact sport. I mean, you brought up the nines. Would you, if Aaron Smith went down, bring in a Tawera Kerr-Barlow, who's one of the best halfbacks in the world right now, right?
But he's a great halfback, and he's doing stuff with La Rochelle that suits the way they play, but unsure if that's going to fit now because the way the French play the game, it's not just the 10 that runs it. Nine's a big controller, so he's running out, he's sorting blind sides, he's directing the forwards from the base of the ruck, where traditionally New Zealand would be play off 10, get the ball to 10, and we do everything through that.
What about first fives then? I mean, who are your backup options that you're looking at in the NPC if, God forbid, something was to happen to a Beauden Barrett, a Richie Mo'unga, or a Damien McKenzie?
It'll have to be Peter Feta because he played in that All Black 15 and he actually played really well as well. And he's playing good for Taranaki. They're doing awesome for for a team that only won 3 games last year. Then they won their first 3 in a row. So I think Peter Feta is definitely the next one. I mean, Ruben Love has been always thrown around there. It really depends on NPC, and I know there's been a lot of chat around how fit for purpose is the NPC. Well, I can guarantee that Possie's probably going to be watching this because, as we say, we never know what's going to happen at a World Cup, and someone could be an absolute bolter.
I think we've got plenty of cover. I think Peter Feta is the next cab off the rank, absolutely. But the one after that, if we do, and touch wood, and it doesn't happen, there's a big, massive, drop. We're young guys sort of coming through, but I think we've got enough cover there. We've got obviously Richie Mo'unga, you've got Beauden Barrett at the back. Even David Havili can actually step up in terms of that sort of that 10 role. So I think that they're fairly well covered in terms of that. But I want to go back to your point about the halfbacks. I think we've got plenty of cover there too. I mean, to bring someone like Kerr-Barlow back in, I don't think they would. I would lean on him in terms of how did the French play. I mean, Dupont's the best player in the world.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you go to a guy that's been there and sort of, watch how he plays? And he's really knowledgeable, as TK, in terms of, the French game. lean on him in
Tap into
terms
that.
of, how can we actually exploit something. You're talking about some of the French locks. I think Fozzie Net will be looking to do that and asking a few players, the game around it once he gets to the knockout stages.
Well, what about locks, loosies and props? Who are the next cabs off the rank there? When you look at the experience that we're losing for the first couple of games, who would you sort of look at bringing in? Is it the Sammy Penny-Finals and the Josh Lords, or is it other people sitting here in New Zealand?
Yeah, I think they got to use the guys that are there, and I think that Josh Lord, who has a similar profile to Retallick, is going to be the one, big, physical. He's going to fill that gap nicely, and if you start reaching for guys in New Zealand, how far they've been out of the team, how much they have to catch up, and you know what I mean. It's a short time to the World Cup, like 19 days, and things are going to go quick, and there's no lead up where they got front straight away, and they're going to be ready. They've rotated their team the last couple of weeks, so they'll be firing for that one, and we've got to make sure we match that.
These are the things that the coaches will be planning for. It's always like the what ifs,
Yeah.
because there's always something that's going to happen during a Rugby World Cup. You talk about 2011. I mean, who would have thought? You're going to go through 4 or 5, first fives. But those are the things that the coaches are constantly going over. What if this happens?
Yeah.
What if this happens here? Anything could happen. That's why you've got to get guys, playing in, NPC back here in New Zealand, making sure they're up to speed, but also, the dynamic of the team, who they've sort of picked, taking over a Brad Weber, but making sure there's plenty of options there with injuries or the judicial, because that could be a big thing as well. So it's your what ifs. You want to make sure that there's nothing that sort of you've gone into this Rugby World Cup, because it's a lot different than going to on an India tour or a rugby championship. This is a one-offer, So you make sure that you get everything right, because as I've experienced, you could be knocked out in the quarterfinals and be coming home.
Yeah.
So, you've got to make sure you tick all those things off.
Speaking of injuries, a massive in for South Africa for the first time since he tore his ACL. So he had a knee reconstruction surgery in April this year. That's 4.5 months later. Siya Kolisi, the captain of the Springboks, who's like this godlike figure. Everyone respects him. He's got so much mana, Taylor. He played 40 minutes today against Wales, and he didn't look like he's had a massive knee injury.
Oh, 4.5 months is absolutely remarkable. I mean, the standard is like 9 months, 12 months if we're being precautionary. To get back in 6 months is incredible, like we've seen, but 4.5, I don't think I've ever heard anyone return at test match level.
Amazing.
To this, and he played well. He didn't look out of sorts whatsoever, and he's huge for South Africa's campaign because he is their cult figure. Everyone in South Africa knows him. I was watching the Netball World Cup and they put the camera on him so many times in the crowd. It's a completely different code, but every time the camera was on him, the crowd erupted. He's such a key figure for them.
Been playing in France too as well, doesn't he?
Yeah, he's built, and I think that helps him a lot. He's a bit of a tank, has those quads of doom, you know what I mean? So take the load off the knee, but, to see him back playing, I think it's something you want to see. We want every team to have their best players. Sometimes injury does happen, but, you want to be a contest, and, he'll be there, when they play the All Blacks in the next couple of days and mixing it up.
Yeah, he's inspirational, isn't he? He's massive in terms of the culture that they have, but team leader. When you come back and do stuff like that, that just lifts the team, once again. And still can't get over 4 months. 4 months.
Amazing.
Running. I mean, because you want to get yourself right. You don't go straight into international. You warm yourself up in sort of other ways of domestic sort of. No way, not this
him.
guy. I mean, this is why he's so special. He is a god.
Yeah.
It's a mental battle too, right, to get back, because your confidence drops when you've had knee surgery. You're a little bit hesitant, each time you're jackling over a ruck, scared someone's going to come in and chop your knees, or, hesitant to step off it. But the way he played, he was playing so freely, and it also goes to show his character and how mentally strong he is to come back like that. And I think that would also, strike fear into some opposition's eyes, knowing that he was that tough to get back.
So you mentioned it, Siya Kolisi. He'll be playing against the All Blacks at Twickenham. He needs the game time. You just know it. What do the All Blacks do with this test? 2 weeks out from a massive opener against France. Do they play their #1 team?
Oh, hard, isn't it? Like, as a player, you want to play. You play rugby to play, but there's always going to be that sort of thought, like, the what if, like, you don't want to go out there and bash each other, then we lose another guy, especially could be your last World Cup, could be your first World Cup, but I think they got to roll the ones. There's too important, that first game against France. They got to roll the ones, give them game time, fix anything that they need fixing. I think, especially with the injuries they have, see how they go, the replacements at lock at 6, and then they'll get the best idea, then playing for the last 2 weeks.
Well, it's been 3 weeks since that #1 side played in Melbourne, hasn't it, Mills? They've had a bit of a break.
Yeah, and the lead-up's important. We're a lot different to the Northern Hemisphere teams. You know, they're coming off the back end of their pre-season, so they got time that they need that game. They need to sort of get up to sort of, I suppose, game management sort of fitness. With us, it's a hard one because they've had, it's a long time, and so you've got to get them out there. If you don't put your guys, your number one team out there, you're waiting for another couple of weeks before that happens. So perhaps, you know, putting those guys out there for the first 40, 50, 60 odd minutes, and then, you know, sort of, you know, taking them off, because that is a risk, okay? You don't want to go in there, but at the back of your mind, I mentioned it before, Taylor, you know, what if things do happen? But I think that they need a decent hit out because they've been off for so long.
Absolutely, and we actually saw when South Africa, you know how remember when they flew all those players here early and those players weren't test matched hardened, so when they did come up against the All Blacks, they probably weren't as good. They probably would have been better off playing against Australia that previous week, so I think we don't want to fall into that trap and rest key players. But as you said, the injury risk, I mean, look what happened to France losing their 10, that was huge. So yeah, it's going to be interesting to see who plays, but I think it needs to be our strongest team, and it will be.
Well, if you think England's been in a little bit of turmoil, you should see the Wallabies. Now, that build up to the Rugby World Cup has been a wild ride under Eddie Jones. He fronted media in Australia before they flew out, and there were plenty of barbs thrown.
I love this negativity. It's fantastic. I love it, love it. Keep going, keep going. Keep going, keep going. Keep going.
What was the what did you see the difference?
Oh, nothing, mate. We're terrible. You know we're terrible. Just tell us we're terrible. And we'll prove you wrong. Thanks for the worst press conference I've ever had in World Rugby. Worst press conference. Well done, boys. That is the worst I've ever seen. Forget it, boys. All right, good luck. You got to give yourselves uppercuts, boys.
Honestly, the guy is one of a kind. I mean, you've experienced media from all over the world. What's the English media like? Surely he would have copped a little bit from there, and he's saying, this is the worst press conference I've ever been to.
Well, it's just Eddie being Eddie, isn't it? Like, the English are tough, but, you know, I think the Aussies are the worst. But I think it just shows that he's going to take the heat, and people say that, and he's smart. Like, he knows what he's doing. He's got a young team. I do like Big Skelts as captain. Yeah. You know what I mean? He's going to lead the boys. They're going to get around him. Literally, because he can hold the whole team under his arms, and then they're just going to play. You know what I mean? I think he's got a good idea of how they want to play, and they'll follow him. You
just asked me who the Wallabies' first game is against. It's against Georgia, which isn't going to be an easy game, the way that Georgia has been developing the last few. But now Australia are going to the World Cup, Mills, without an attack coach. Brad Davis walked out of the team for personal reasons before they flew out. So he's gone. They've got a new captain, obviously, in Will Skelton, new coach in Eddie Jones. They dropped their two most senior players as well, in Hooper and Cooper. But what if they win? He just said, can you see it happening? Could they do a Jimmy Spittle, America's Cup, come back from 7-1 down? And I don't want to say it in San Francisco. Could they do that in Paris?
They have got the ability to go to the final. Oh, I can tell you that, right? Oh, look at the way they turn it around. You're right. With all this happening, it almost seems like we're a little bit different, right? You know, if there was a bit of heat there, we kind of like, oh man, this is, you know, with him, he loves it. Okay, so put everything on. Look at the way they played in Bledisloe too. You know, a young squad. He's only picked the 110 really. But they have a very, very good side, and a side that you know, that whilst he's picking out how negative the media are over there, they have actually got a really good team.
What Eddie Jones has done is he's just gone into Rugby Australia and dropped a big bomb, and like everything's imploded, the media, the team. It's been quite interesting to see the reaction as well of other players showing their support for Hooper and Cooper, as you said. But look, if they win the World Cup, that's going to be pretty remarkable. But I do like Eddie's reaction to media, because for so long people say rugby's boring, you know, we don't get that whole fanfare and no one really is honest in press conferences. Well, that's about as honest as you can get, right? They always say, oh, it's just going through the motions when you go and have a presser. That was not going through the motions. He showed his emotion, if that. So I really like Eddie and his outlook on things, but let's see how they go.
Do you think Australia can win the whole thing?
If they make the quarters, then that's something, isn't it? Then they're all one-off games. They'll build their momentum. You know, Georgia start off, they'll get a couple of wins. They have the personnel. You know, they got good players there. They showed that through Super Rugby. It's just, can they do it? I'm not too sure, but, you know, it's all about that draw, how you get through it.
He's smart, right? I think success is making the semi-finals for Rugby Australia, particularly when you're looking at the next one, right? But you make the final, anything can happen.
Just imagine if they did, though.
If they did, I mean, imagine that. I mean,
he would be a god.
Man, what do you want? I tell you, all that media that he's talking to, we'd be wanting to be his mates for the rest of their lives.
Oh, don't go anywhere. Plenty more to come on The Breakdown. We talk about the Pacific Islands next. And we look at the new eligibility laws and see if more players will follow the suits of Charlie Faumuina, Lima Sopoaga and many others.
Inisi with the ball, and Inisi is just straight through the fence, straight to Taparua, in before the second try.
They go towards the back line and run! The skipper! And he breaks the line too. They're over the line. It's a try.
Take it up to Bayer, and Bayer finds space on the outside. A big man.
Sifafita, and he's running there like a winger.
No mai, hoki mai, welcome back into The Breakdown. Well, without a doubt, one of the stories of this Rugby World Cup is the switch in allegiance, the former All Blacks and former Wallabies players that will line up for their homeland. Before we take a look at what players they will be, Mills, just how special is that and significant for these boys?
Oh, it's hugely significant in terms of, I suppose, the experience they bring, but also to beef up their squads. But I think the experience for me is going to be, the key one. Having guys that have, now able to share some of the things that they've brought back from the Tier 1 nations, but also lifts motivation within that sort of nation as well. So it's fantastic.
If we look at some of the names here, this is Samoa, Charlie Faumuina, Stephen Luatua, Lima Sopoaga, all played for the All Blacks. Of course, Christian Leali'ifano for the Wallabies. John, you could have been playing there for Samoa as well. Is that something that you've potentially thought about, like these guys have done?
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's just, timing for me maybe a bit, old in the age bracket, but it's like Mill said, it's great for the game. It's really going to lift the standards, and I think it's crucial when these guys go back to their roots, represent their family, but they do it in a way where they still play in that way that Samoa want to play. They're not going to try and change their identity. Yes, they'll play for these Tier 1 nations, but you go back, maybe bring some standards, but you still want to play that flair, that Fijian flair or that Samoan flair as well.
Mills, would you, if the eligibility laws had changed, maybe in 2015, have done the switch?
Oh, absolutely. I think if it was available when I was there, and obviously, I could have, then I would have done the same thing. But it's great that guys have gone back, and you're going to lift that sort of motivation amongst the country and amongst your peers. The only downside I'd probably say is, they're not going into nations where they have the same resource. And often when players go back to they're very vocal in terms of that and how to change that. But I hope they're sort of vocal in a different way, that they actually try and really promote it, touch on a little wee things, because we know it's going to take time. It's going to take, and look at where it's got to already. I mean, it's taking a long time to even get, Moana and a draw into the Super Rugby and things like that. But there's going to be frustrations, no doubt, but also it's a good reality check for a lot of them as well to realise that some of those Tier 2 nations are really finding it hard financially.
And I think it's really good too, just going back to what they're bringing is they're coming in key positions like Lima Sopoaga and Christian Leali'ifano, game drivers, and often you've got so much talent in those Samoa teams, but they're missing that maestro to really pull things together, and you've got people like that coming into the team. Charlie Faumuina as well. We've always struggled, particularly Samoa, at scrum time against these big nations. But you've also got, Jordan Lay, who's in the squad, who's been playing week in and week out for the Blues. So it's actually not just talking about those people coming in, but the actual calibre of players who have chosen Samoa first has improved because of the likes of playing more Super Rugby. They're not all just playing, for Moana Pacific. You see Jordan Taufua there, a stalwart for the Crusaders, went overseas as well. Like, this is a really impressive team. You've also still got locals in there in Milani Matavawa and Miracle Fai'ilangi. So I think it's got that really good mix of people who have played international rugby for the Wallabies and for the All Blacks, but you've also got people who chose that nation first, and you've also got locals, which is good. And this Tonga team, Mills, is pretty fantastic as well. That backline is outstanding.
Taylor, do you think we'll see other players follow suit, maybe play a World Cup for New Zealand or Australia, head overseas, get the big bucks? Leicester Whanganuku is one that's going next year, and then maybe switch their allegiances. Richie Mo'unga, could these players do it?
Oh, absolutely. I think they should, because I think there was a lot of hesitance to play for, the Manu Samoa, Ikalatahi, or the Flying Fijians, because they didn't really know the players. They weren't getting enough test matches, or, they'd only play each other every now and then. They'll just play Samoa, Tonga, Fiji, and that's boring for a kid. You want to go out and play all these other countries, and not just every 4 years at the World Cup. And the more kids who are seeing these guys playing and lifting the profile of the whole team, and yes, as Mill said, it's going to take time, but, if just one kid picks Samoa or Tonga over, the All Blacks or the Wallabies, then they're doing their job, and I think that's really important. But Rome wasn't built in a day, so it's going to take time, but I think it's huge to lift the profile of the team. But first and foremost, they need to play more games.
For Samoa and Tonga, their target may be the next Rugby World Cup, but for Fiji, who have had a side in Super Rugby for the last 2 years, the Fijian Drua, you didn't manage to play against them in Super Rugby this year, but what impact is that going to have on the draw? If we take a look at their draw, they are in a perfect draw. They've got Wales, Australia and Georgia. How far do you think they could go in the tournament?
Fiji's been great the last couple of tournaments, isn't it? They've made quarters a lot. I think they make the semis 1 year, but they've always had a strong team and they've played well, and they've backed themselves. They've mostly beaten Wales over the last couple of years. They've had success, you know what I mean? The Drua team then into this Fiji and into the PNT Cup, they won quite easily. I think they've got a strong team, and they haven't really brought anyone in. They've just brought their players and their overseas players. You see them on social media. They got 40 mats in the whale, and that's what they love. They're down in the waterfalls, cruising around. That's what they used to. They love being together, and I think it shows when they play.
And interestingly, we talk about people making the switch. So Seta Taumanivalu made the switch and actually missed out completely on the final squad, which says something, as they are actually still really relying on their local players. There's so many drill players in that comp, but also heaps that are playing overseas as well.
But I think out of the three Pacific nations, they probably are the one that are more established, in terms of where they've got to. They've had a lot of exposure to sort of international coaching. You had Jason Ryan there. You've also had Varun Cotter that sort of coached them. They came here and really challenged the All Blacks, right? They gave them a good go, in Dunedin. I think that your point, John, when you say, they've beaten Wales a couple of times. Australia, they understand the Australian, because of Super Rugby, the Drua understand sort of the style that some of these players have. They'll know that, and I think, man, they've got a very high chance of going through to those quarters. They might catch Wales off guard, considering where they're at the moment too.
I do worry, though, about the lead-up that these teams have had, because you think the All Blacks have played the Wallabies, Argentina, South Africa, the Six Nations teams obviously playing each other. How much can Tonga take from playing Canada, who's not even going to be at the World Cup? They played them twice. Samoa played Japan, who was in their pool. They did pump them. But then they also played a Barbarians team, which was, people are coming out of retirement to play in that Barbarians team, so it wasn't exactly the strongest Barbarians side. So, look, they have fixtures this weekend. I think Samoa plays England. But that's going to be really big, to see actually where they are at. They know where they're at against each other. Fiji beat Samoa. They're emerging as the best Pacific nation, but it's going to be really hard and interesting to see how they go up against other teams outside of the remit that they always play in.
Some big games coming up for these nations. Just take a look at that. There it is, Taylor. Ireland taking on Manu Samoa. That is this Sunday, coming live on Sky. Well, don't go anywhere. Still to come on The Breakdown, we've got a very special guest, the new and improved Ranfurly Shield. We hear the backstory, maybe tell a few stories when John held the Shield as well. And Steve Lancaster is joining us from New Zealand Rugby. He's the head of community rugby.
Drummond has it down himself, ball on the inside from Mata Early. Puts in the fend as well, got the offload away. Oh, this is outstanding skill. What skill? Blair Murray.
And now Blythe steaming onto it, just backing her pace. Louise Blythe trying to get around, and does get around the outside. That is brilliant, searing pace from Louise Blythe.
bragging about a hat-trick. He's already got 2. Still going, floats the pass over the top. Infield, oh, terrific work from Counties Manukau.
Try something different, and oh my goodness, I think that's a try for Garden Basham.
Playing for the prized Ranfurly Shield, they say it's one of the most prized possessions in New Zealand rugby. Joining us now is the head of community rugby from New Zealand Rugby, Steve Lancaster. Steve, thank you so much for your time. Tell me, what does this shield mean to you and this new upgrade that it's just been through?
Well, it means a lot to me. I was fortunate enough to play for the Shield when I was playing. I've got photos of my kids holding it in the lounge. I think everyone's got a story like that with the Shield. And it's 120 years old, so you know it's got a lot of stories that it could tell, I'm sure. But it's also suffered a bit of wear and tear over the years. So following last season, we had it completely restored, and what you see here is a stunning new Ranfurly Shield.
So are you part of the reason why it needed to be restored, or was that John in Auckland because he won it a few times as well?
No, definitely not the Auckland boys, you know what I mean? We were very safe, but, you know, the Shield is great, you know what I mean? It's, I think coming back from overseas, they don't have that kind of thing. And, you know, being down at the Bay, everyone's trying to do the workout, like if they win it, they win it. It's a 10-minute conversation because the boys love it. And, you know, everyone wants to have it, everyone wants to have that story and say that they've done it.
So the Shield still has that meaning?
It does, but I'm interested to know, because I've never won it either, but it actually looks pretty good. What's happened to the old log? What are you doing with it?
So we decommissioned the original piece of wood. So what you see here is it's a new piece of wood. It's English oak, the same wood as the original Shield, but that wood was really degrading. It was getting to a point where we were concerned for its longevity. So we've decommissioned that. We've retained it at NZR at the moment, and we're still figuring out exactly what we'll do with it, but we'll ensure it gets looked after.
Steve, tell us, last week we had Mark Robinson come on the program. He was talking about the NPC and he made comments about, in its current state, it not being fit for purpose. You've also spoken to media this week and you've said the competition will remain the same in 2024. Why is that? And what did you think of Robbo's comments about it not being fit for purpose?
Yeah, well, you have to put Mark's comments into context. And I mean, obviously, I'm not going to speak for Mark, but from our perspective, the competition's still a really important part of our rugby framework here in New Zealand. I mean, you guys have been talking about how important it is keeping players on the field and prepared in case they're required for Rugby World Cup. It's a critical part of our pathway in terms of giving aspiring professionals the opportunity to play. Also, just our best community and amateur players get to play against professional players, and that's really unique. You talk about the Shield being unique, John, but the NPC is actually really unique in that context as well. So it's a really important competition for us. I guess you know, the one thing that we constantly keep an eye on is the cost of competing in the competition. And we want to ensure that all 14 teams are able to continue to compete in the competition and that they can all be competitive. But that's not to say that it's not an important competition or that it's going anywhere.
Steve, does it worry you then when you're hearing, you know, I suppose PU unions that are already in the red in terms of the financial sort of support they've already sort of had, in terms, and then also the stability of the competition and the PUs themselves?
Yeah, well, as I say, our primary concern is the sustainability of the competition. It is an important competition to us. We want to see it still here in another 20, 30 years' time. But the thing you've got to remember about the provincial unions is that they're all not-for-profit organisations, right? They don't exist to make a profit. And so all the money that they earn, they invest into the game. And what that means is that in some years they make a profit, in other years they don't. But generally they're budgeting, you know, to make a break-even or a small profit, because that's the reason they exist, right, is to generate income and then invest that into the game.
Yeah, I think it's a good point when you made. The competition's got to run itself, and if you look at the English comp, you know, it's such all this big money, but you know, 3 teams are folded, and you don't want to see that down here. And being in the competition, playing in the competition, you see how hard the unions are working to get good players out, give them the facilities that they need, and then the players let them take over, because there is a lot of talent, and it's great for me who can come back and still play the competition and work and train against these young guys and share my knowledge, because they might not have the opportunity to go overseas and do that.
How much has changed in, 12 years is it since you were last in New Zealand playing NPC between these competitions? What are the things that you noticed immediately?
I think between the lines, not much. You know, it's still very competitive. Obviously, the age level might be slightly down, but it's off the field, isn't it? It's these smaller grounds, obviously the fans or people not attending the games, and you know, and a tight schedule, you know what I mean? You're playing these 10 games in 9 weeks. our smaller squads. At the Bay, I only can speak for the Bay of Plenty, but we got maybe running 33 guys, and you got a couple of sore bodies on a Monday, then you're down to 29. So you not even have 2 full teams training against each other, which that's tough for the coaches, but the players understand it, and you just got to run with it.
Yeah, and the competition itself is actually still exciting. Like, I have to eat my words, because last week I said, the Tasmans, the Canterburys, the Aucklands, they all have 1 to 23 Super Rugby players, and the Northlands and the Southlands probably have 2, 3, 4. Well, Northland absolutely pumped Tasman over the weekend, and they had 2 very strong teams, but Northland just, they got up for it, and that's the good thing, is that they still really care about this competition, the players, and there was a good crowd there considering the treacherous conditions. Up in Whangarei, and it's usually the winterless north. Well, it wasn't that night, but even going back to when you say it's good to see players playing up against All Blacks and Super Rugby players. You look at Daniel Rona, who was playing for Taranaki. He was a concreter.
Great story.
Great couple of games for Taranaki. Pulled into the Chiefs as injury replacement, and now has a contract locked in for the next few years. So there is still a purpose for it. But again, going back to Mills's point, it's the money. It's getting those bums on seats to come. There haven't really been the crowds that we had hoped.
Yeah, is that concerning, Steve? I mean, we've sort of seen it in Super Rugby. A lot of rugby on. People getting bums on seats. You've spoken about it's a non-charitable organisation. So when it comes to costs and no one's actually coming to spend that money to watch the games, I mean, is that concerning that we're not seeing bums on seats? Particularly when it's our heart and soul of our New Zealand rugby, right? It's the next generation coming through. So, I mean, what can we do to be able to get those bums on seats and generate that sort of attraction?
Yeah, well, it's a good point, Mills. And I mean, there's a lot of rugby played in a year, right? And we've got Super Rugby Pacific in the first part of the year. We've got Super Rugby Opiki. We've got the Farah Palmer Cup. We've got the NPC. So there's a lot of choice for people in terms of where they spend their dollar and what they do go to see. But I think, John, you just talked about it playing in smaller venues now, and so it's you much more easily get a good atmosphere, and 3,000 or 4,000 people at the Cake Tin in Wellington or at Eden Park, and it doesn't look very full. But you put those people into Oniwa Domain or Hutt Rec, and all of a sudden you've got an atmosphere in it. And you look at the club grounds in the UK, and a lot of those grounds are smaller venues with smaller capacities, and you get an atmosphere. So that's something that we've been really pleased to have the opportunity to trial this year. And I think that as we move forward, we'll see more and more games played in those smaller venues. But the other point I want to make is that crowd attendance is only one part of the equation for us, right? So obviously every game's broadcast on Sky. Viewership is up. We had big uplift in viewership across both Super Rugby and the NPC last year. And so a lot of people are watching the games other than at the ground, but they're still watching it.
Which is good for us, right?
Yeah.
So is that the major difference then between, say, a smaller ground at Oniwa Domain getting 3,000 people and the 1A final in Auckland getting 10,000 people to Waitemata? Is it that one's on television and one isn't, or is tribalism stronger in college rugby now than in NPC? Where do you see that balance and relationship? What does it look like from New Zealand Rugby's perspective?
Yeah, I think you've got to be a little bit cautious when you compare the final of one of the highest profile school competitions versus a regular round-robin round of the NPC, right? So you don't see those sort of crowds week in and week out at First 15 rugby. But there's no doubt that the tribalism's huge around school rugby, and that's something that we celebrate and we acknowledge as a really great thing. But it's not apples for apples when you're comparing round 3 of the NPC with the final of a school competition that has a big following.
Is there collaboration in terms of... I know there's restrictions in terms of the school rugby, but has there been collaboration in terms of where NZ Rugby are compared to, possibly a partnership there with the schools?
Yeah, well, that's one of the unfortunate things yesterday. Just if we run with that example, right, it was unfortunate to have First 15 finals played at the same time as the Battle of the Bridge. It would be great if they weren't, right? But again, these are independent competitions. We're not in control of every competition, and there are independent bodies that are making those scheduling decisions as well.
Is NZR helping these provincial unions to try build that tribalism back? Because we spoke about with school, of course there's tribalism because you're forced to go to school for 5 years and you're rubbing shoulders with your First 15 mates in your chemistry class, so you'll go and watch. So you've got people going to school games who aren't even really fans friends with whoever's on the field, and there's always been that disconnect with provincial union players because, you know, they're not like the teachers and the butchers like they used to be when it wasn't professional. So how is New Zealand Rugby helping these provincial unions build that tribalism?
Yeah, well, the provincial unions are actually doing it for themselves, right? So I was at Onio Domain yesterday, and in the aftermatch, you know, a couple of the players were up in the Takapuna club rooms afterwards, and, you know, it was really refreshing to hear them talk about the fact that they'd grown up on the shore, they'd gone to school on the shore, they played their club rugby on the shore, and now they're pulling on their provincial jersey, right? So we're seeing a little bit of a return to that grassroots ethos, which is a point of difference for the NPC, right? It's players that you've grown up with, that you work alongside, that you see on a Saturday at the club rooms, and then they're representing your province. And it's obviously different in Super Rugby because it's a fully professional competition.
I think I've seen that firsthand down at the Bay of Plenty, you know, when going down there and meeting the guys and asking their background stories. Then they're all local in the Bay of Plenty, and you see that. And then when they talk about their families and they're coming to the Tauranga Domain or we're going to Rotorua, and you talk about like that rivalry, it's still there, because when they started talking about Auckland, I won't repeat what the boys were saying, but, you know, they don't like them. And then the next week we'll
What
play...
do you say when they have those
I sort of just... I'll go back a little bit. Then obviously we played Waikato the following week, even worse. And I was like, holy, I was like, boys, oh, geez. Oh. But, you know, they're proud. And like everyone is. When I played for Auckland, I was proud. And these boys are the same. And,
and that's the beauty of it, right? You've got those players that are really parochial and proud of their province, and they get to rub shoulders and play alongside the likes of you, and that's a really unique point.
Yeah, absolutely, Jen. It's so cool having you back in the NPC. Maybe Mills will come out of retirement and have another crack. Before we let you go, though, from all of you, we want to hear what the excitement level's like within New Zealand Rugby for the World Cup, and also bold predictions ahead of Twickenham. What are you thinking?
Oh, well, there's only one team going to win at Twickenham, that's for sure. But no, excitement levels are through the roof at our place. And, you know, we're starting to get quite a buzz in the office. There's a few social activities planned, you know, early morning kick-offs, get together and watch games, that sort of thing. So can't wait.
So exciting. Well, I'm just going to guess that these three are all going to say All Blacks as well. All Blacks taking on South Africa at Twickenham. That'll be live on Sky next Saturday morning. But coming up, midweek game, Ranfurly Shield Challenge between Tasman and Wellington. Get amongst.